Like, and the reason, I mean, his whole life was on the line. Like, they were trying to take all his kids and paint him as a child molester. So,
no, and that was a marriage that Mark broke up, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
To get his wife?
Yeah, to get access to his wife. I think they kind of wanted I think it was useful to have the kids, or they thought, because they were young and they needed new blood or something like that. So they wanted to have this guy's kids in the group too.
So sad.
Yeah, he got custody, but it was it was a total, it was insanity what was going on with that guy at the time, and that was sort of the gateway to the story. But at the first time I listened to it, I didn't really trust it, because I was hearing like all these stories about this guy being a monster.
Okay, right. The slander had begun from the cult to the ex-member.
Yes.
Got it. Yeah, because in your documentary, it was quite outstanding. His testimony, and you can hear the pain in his voice. Here's a man who gets tapped on the shoulder one day and says, "It's your turn," goes into a tent, and his stepfather and the leader of the cult, Mark B., begin to undress him and wash him with their hands in a ritual. My God, his family's there, his money's tied up in the investment, his business, everything he has is tied up in this thing. Now he's in a coercive moment. Very awkward. Now Craig lost it all.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't quite lose it all. Like he fought, he beat Mark by releasing tapes of Mark that made it sort of impossible to deny that he was leading a cult with some like sexual perversions going on in the gospel, and that's how he got his kids back in reality.
Well done.
So he lost his wife and his best friend, all his money, everybody, like all his relationships in this community, but he got what he wanted most, and the reason what he was fighting for, which was his kids.
That is a great ending to that story. I'm glad to hear that. That's what happens. Like you said, they entrap these people. They get collateral on them, and they just go crazy with it. They use it to their absolute end. Yeah.
And what's incredible too is, like, if that guy wouldn't have spoken out, like, okay, there are millions of people now, well, at least like as far as like people who've seen my videos about this group on like TikTok or YouTube or whatever. Like a lot of people know about this story. People are interested in this story. I'm talking to you. Like it's something that like is generating buzz on the internet. There's a Rolling Stone article coming out soon. All that is because like if it wasn't for this guy risking everything to speak out, like if that interview didn't exist, like this cult would just be like just have a free license to do whatever they wanted.
Oh, Syran, it's so true. You know, behind the one whistleblower stands thousands of people who are getting abused right now. And it takes so much bravery. You just have to be willing to be completely slandered. It's terrible, the setup. This is what they do. This is how they go under the radar.
Yeah, they force people into silence, and I mean he's the reason again why this all, like, I mean, there's a lot of steps in this process.
Such bravery.
But it kind of starts with him like saying like, I don't care if like what they do to me or whatever, like I'm gonna, like, he just felt like he just couldn't believe what he'd gone through. And I guess like he sort of had an awakening too. I mean, there's been rumors about this group being a cult forever. Or just like a weird kooky religious group. So like when this was happening and they were just like turning his life inside out, and he's fired from his job, he lost, and there's all these stories about him.
Tell me when Craig went to the police and how he was coerced into doing that.
Yeah, so I mean, basically they were trying to get rid of him, or they knew they were going to get rid of him. Like it wasn't some like spur of the moment decision where it's like, we're going to get rid of this guy, take his wife and kids. And like Mark's current wife, he did the exact same thing to their marriage. It was this plan all along where they put these people in terrible situations. They collected all this blackmail on them, and this guy was just like Craig was so brainwashed. It's just such an extreme story, like sexual confessions that I mentioned earlier. And Mark convinced him, like, oh, that's real bad. Like, you need to go and confess to the police about like this. I won't even it's ridiculous. What
you think about while you masturbate.
About what you think about while you masturbate, yes.
Which, thought crime, where we're at there, you got to go confess your thought crime to the police.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like the silliest. It sounds ridiculous, right? But this guy already was like fighting to stay in the group. And he thought like this message was coming from Jesus.
Yeah.
So he literally walked into the police department and got the attention of a cop and said whatever he had to say. It must have been like the most surreal experience on earth for that police officer.
Oh my God. And this is like cults in a nutshell. We do things we would never, ever do if we weren't under such psychological influence. And fear. I would add fear. So let's get into this. Let's talk about washing. Okay. I know that in your reporting, you've shown how it's a fundamental part of this sect. It's a religious perversion. It's a ritual. Let's talk about it. What goes on?
It's basically this way to molest people that where the person who's being molested is participating in their own molestation, essentially. And they can't say, like there was a guy who tried to report this to the police. Okay. This washing where they strip you naked and wash your whole body and your genitals and then you wash them, essentially. He tried to report this to the police, and they were like, when they were doing the report, they were really interested, and they were like, when did you tell him no? And he couldn't say, like, that he said no, because he never did, because, like, there's so much pressure to do this.
Yep. So they couldn't file the report because he didn't say no?
Well, they couldn't press charges, no. I mean, people are allowed to wash each other's penises or whatever if they say they don't want it, or they go along with it.
And you can't say to the police, well, this is years of coercion or emotional blackmail that got me to the point that I know I can't say no in a situation. I would have the repercussions would be great. You can't say that. They're like, well, that's not my problem. So the washing is, quote, legal if they don't say no.
Yeah, it's totally.
They aren't forced.
You couldn't prosecute Mark or Gary for that. But
so how often does this happen, and are they doing this to the kids?
I don't know, like, the frequency of it. Like, there's a lot of people don't want to talk about it. Like, the last thing they want to be associated with is this sex cult that ruined their lives.
Yeah.
So there's only a couple stories about washing. They did, like, they addressed it in this article that came out in Washington. They talked about, like, well, you got to hear the church, Ruthie, the wife of Mark. She's like, they bring up washing, and she's like, oh yeah, it's just this, like, it's like this baptism thing, and it's not this baptism thing. Like, it's sexual assault.
Absolutely. Now the body's in Washington now, so they picked up and left Alaska.
Yeah, it got a little too hot. Like, the story was kind of circulating around town because one of the guys in the group owned this business that was like, it was sort of like owning an electric company. Like, everybody knew, like, he installed satellites, but in this part of the country, like, there's no cable. Like, you can't, like, you're not going to have phone access. Like, satellites are, like, super, super important. Everybody has one. And everybody knew this guy, and people that worked for him. He was responsible in a lot of ways for this Craig's wife leaving and abandoning her kids. And people sort of knew what she had done. Like when that case was over and she was just, like, completely absent from like the previous life she had.
Yeah.
And there was sort of like all this, I mean, it never like broke as a story. It never hit like the newspaper in town, but people were gossiping about it. And it made it sort of untenable for leadership, because that's who there are some people that were getting that rightly were getting like blamed for it. And they moved to Hawaii. The whole group moved to like resettled in Kauai in like 2016 through 28 or through most of 2018.
Wow.
And I know like the biggest mystery of the story is what was going on in Hawaii, because I talked to people who were in Hawaii when they were in Hawaii. I've heard some stories from children who were raised in the group. There's one, like the first like child rescue was in Hawaii.
You're listening to the Franky Files. FrankyFilesPodcast.com.
That they were just like, they were unpopular with the community. I don't know what happened. I know nothing about it.
Nikiski is a small town, so I'm sure, like, if he's going in and installing satellite in everyone's house, he's acting strange or talking strange, and the words get out, and then the gossip gets out. Wow, I can only imagine. So they, like you said, they can't really go to the grocery store in Nikiski anymore, huh?
Well, I guess like I think the situation now that sort of is going on in Nasket is like now they can't go to the grocery store.
Oh, with like, Washington.
Well, like I think like calling the cops was not like a total, and calling the FBI was not a total bust, even though it was extremely frustrating, because you just have these situations. Like I guess with the FBI, like I was trying to get them all these recordings, because I had all these recordings of Mark from that members had recorded of him death threat. Outrageous.
You had proof.
Yeah, and I wanted. It was like, hey, you know, these people own. They have companies, and there's all this money, but they just wouldn't give me anywhere to send. Like I couldn't send like a recording to the FBI, even if it had Mark saying he was going to blow up the White House. Like it doesn't matter what he said on. So it was a very frustrating experience.
So the thing they seemed to close in on, the local police, when you sent them, was the missing child.
Yeah, it was just like
missing persons.
It was there was just like a lot of like suspicious stuff about the addresses, and nobody had seen this. There was like no digital footprint of this person at all, other than like some like dummy profile on Facebook that evaporated the second I messaged it. There was just all kinds of stuff. There was this phone number, like her phone number rang to this guy who was like an African immigrant. And when I called him and asked for Carrie, he was like, man, I get these phone calls all the time. Like, I got to change my number. I thought like she might be like gone.
Oh, so you're looking at disappearing people at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's what I was most concerned about.
Oh, that's a huge concern. What is this whole sovereign citizen aspect of the body? What does that entail?
That's really new. The sovereign citizen thing is like this new development with the body. I mean, it's a right-wing, extremist, no government.
Libertarian,
it's a conspiracy theory, essentially.
Okay.
And Mark is really into conspiracy theories. I think the reality is that they I know they adopted this when they were in Hawaii. That wasn't a part of the Alaska body experience. Basically, just this way to find people who are like fed up with the government. I mean, they have all these like these lawsuits. I mean, sovereign citizens are sort of famous for like cutting up their IDs, making their own license plates and stuff. Like literally like separating, like I am no longer a U.S. citizen. I am a sovereign citizen in the United States.
And my mom, after I was talking to her the other day about this, and she said she got approached right before she went to the cult where we went. So this was in the 70s. And someone said that she should become a sovereign citizen and keep a silver dollar in her pocket. This was part of, the legal trickery to get out of answering as a U.S. citizen. Very strange. I have no idea, any more of it, but that's a strange aspect because they're literally trying to skirt the law.
And it's a fantasy. It's a way to avoid all laws. I mean, it makes sense why these guys would believe this stuff or why it appeals to them. I think that what's most important about the sovereign citizen thing is it's way easier to get people in these dark red parts of the country to recruit people. But with the sovereign citizen thing, than it is to recruit people by being like, hey, this guy is like the son of God.
So this is adding to the recruitment tools.
I think it's totally a recruitment thing. I think that's how it started.
I'm seeing that. Okay. Well, who is Chris C?
He's the guy who got arrested. He's the guy who calls his kids property a bunch of times in that video.
And he's got property in his name now as a part of the cult.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he had a business, in that video, the land of the body that I had on YouTube. It talks about the companies that were owned by the body, members of the body, whatever, different names they adopted over the years. And the last thing that's talked about is this guy has this thing called Sage Mountain in Washington. And I just know, I had more nuanced thoughts about it in the video, but there's just no way this is legitimate business. No way.
Now, Syran, you brought up a good point. You articulate through your various reports the many names and shell companies they've used since inception. Yeah. That includes Sought Out,
Veritas.
Okay.
And then, the Sage Mountain. I guess the thing about Sage Mountain that's really nuts about Chris's company is when Chris saw that video, the company dissolved instantly. It was just gone. I got an email, somebody on the internet. This is just one of these things, just being connected to people on the internet. Somebody alerted me to that, right after it happened. Oh yeah, that company is gone.
Amazing. And this is definitely a thing that happens in cults. When it gets too hot, they change their name.
Oh, yeah.
It's like you're not trying to avoid anything, are you?
If you talk to new members, I call the cult the body. They're called the body because that was what they were going. That's what they are in court reports and police reports.
Okay.
But if you talk to somebody who from Nasket who went to their church or whatever, they would have no idea what you were talking about if you said the body. I mean, the name changes every time they something happens, basically. Yeah. And I'm sure I honestly don't know how they get out of the situation that's going on right now. But if they do, they'll have some other name.
Yep, absolutely. And what is the Australian front going by?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
The Australian thing is really I think when it comes down to it, it's a wild goose chase to get people who stuck out, who would maybe be problems for the group in Washington, just out of the picture. People find out this woman left her 6 kids behind, including a 2-year-old. They'd be upset with that. And then Peter is just he sticks out like a sore thumb.
The Australian guy in video.
He's got that thick Australian accent.
And that's Katie's dad.
Yeah, and he's just obviously not from. He's not from. If you put him in Washington, it would be weird. There actually are Australians in Washington, of course, but he's the guy too who, if he wouldn't have made that video of the land, I don't think they'd be in this situation right now. That was such a huge break. To actually have footage that came from inside the group.
Yeah.
He's made other documents and he writes emails. He still has a Facebook account. This guy just loves to talk and be social.
And he's dangerous for the cult.
Yeah, I mean, he's the ambassador. I think Mark saw him as a liability. and thought, why don't you go back to Australia? And I mean, other members have told me that there was a plan all along to start new bodies.
Yeah.
And spread this thing all over the place. I mean, who knows? Like, I mean, everything is so secretive. Like, they could have, some sect in Connecticut or something. Like, I have no idea.
Right.
But
it sounds like it.
But having this group on the other side of the world, like, I really think, like, I the stories I hear about them and the information I get about that Australian branch is like, it just sounds like this Don Quixote, like, I don't know. It's wild.
Are you now more convinced than ever that cults are dangerous after all your work on this particular cult story?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess it's not even just this particular story as much as it is just immersing myself in the world of these stories. Like, on my website, there are like a ton of stories about cults that have nothing to do with the body. When I actually started doing research and finding out about what made a cult and just realized, like, I had this profound moment of knowing I knew nothing to start from, that turned into, just this, like, I need more information, like, however I can get it. And now I know how, like, horrible these organizations are, and that they're just, like, everywhere. When I first started researching this, I had this idea because I was doing an article about cults, or like local cults in Minnesota. And my first thought, I was like, I wonder if there's ever been like another cult in Minnesota.
Okay.
Like, that's how little I knew about it. Like, of course, like, there's in every state and everywhere, there are like coercive control. If you would have asked me about cults before I went down this journey, I would have been like, yeah, there was that one in the 60s with Charles Manson, and then that one in the 70s where all people drank Flavor Aid. And that would have been like just like the hits, and that was like that. I thought that is the universe of cults. Crazy thing that happens once a decade or something.
That's what most people think, Syran.
I think that is what most people think. Like, I get comments on my videos sometimes that was like, there was a cult in Alaska. It's like, yeah, like there's a cult in Alaska right now, and these guys aren't even there.
And these religious freedoms, I remember when the AG raided the cult I was in, and the leader said, "We're fighting for religious freedoms. They're persecuting us," and spun it. She was accused of bribery. Spun it to the fact that the government is persecuting the cult. Okay, that is part of the religious freedom laws. Certainly enable these people to operate in the dark, coerce members, change their lives, take everything they can, their resources, their family, and move on to the next person. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And you're now, thank you from me, a cult kid, to you. Thank you so much, Syran. It means so much to us to have a person like you in our corner.
Well, yeah, I really appreciate it. I mean, it's like,
thank you.
I guess, like, if it was sort of like an emotional, it became like, I don't know, it's not like a story to me, I guess. And it's not a story to anybody who really, like, dives into this stuff. I mean, the more you know, the more you just, like, see, you look at the history of, like, your own relationships, and, just understanding, like, just the coercion. And through this process, I've gotten to talk to so many survivors and hear their stories. And I've got a couple, like, articles up survivors wrote, or, like, interviewing Patrick Ryan or the I Got Out people. You're hearing, like, survivor stories, and that sort of made it, like, jump off the page for me, as when I was actually, like, talking to people and hearing their stories and just, like, having my mind blown in 1,000 pieces,
It's like you went from journalist to journalist activist.
Yeah.
You were so inspired. That's great. And it is harrowing, like, look at how much courage it takes for one person to speak out. They're surrounded by psychological pressure, threats, coercion.
sometimes people just don't believe this stuff, or there's...
Oh, I know.
There's there's also just like this like really crazy idea that a lot of people have when they hear about a cult, that it's like just these like cow-eyed fools.
Correct.
Or people that want to be abused or something like that.
And that propaganda keeps us silent because we don't want to be looked down upon by society. Mm-hmm. Those of us who survived.
Like what you're doing is braver than what I'm doing, because this is, to me, this like, I didn't like lose a lot of sacrifices in doing this for such a long time. I didn't live it.
I understand.
So it's like it's so much. There's a real bravery to like what you do and getting this information out there that like I just won't know.
I think you're touching on it though quite a bit, Syran. Thanks for that comment. But like from my own experience, like 35 years of silence was killing me. I could no longer do it, and yet I look at this, and I haven't yet connected with people who survived my cult. It hasn't really come out, Morningland Church. It will. I'm going at it 4 months in here. But I'm telling you, the fear has kept every one of the members from my church silent. That shows you, the lack of information shows you the fear and coercion that's been placed upon each person.
The Franky Files.
You said, you made it so clear. The body's been going around for 20 years with the same tactics, the same, thuggery, I'd like to say.
Yeah.
And all of those people are quiet. There's a reason that they're quiet. They were too afraid to lose everything or to be destroyed socially. There's so many ways to destroy a person. So like that's their main tactic. That's how they get away with it. And so, yeah, information is power. Yeah,
and I think like these people too, like in the body, for instance, like they know what happened to the guy who spoke out. Right. They carry around like these documents to tell people about how he's a child molester, like to this day. Like people in Washington have seen that stuff who don't even know anything about this guy or, anything.
Straight slander.
It just keeps on going and going. Like they'll never be satisfied. And that's sort of like you leave the body now and you think about that guy's story. It's like maybe talking isn't like a good thing, but it is like it's such an important thing to every time there's a story out there. It really just changes the perception of.
Leah Remini, inspired a lot of people by coming out about Scientology. She finally said, where is the leader's wife? The police won't file a missing persons report, and I'm concerned. That's what started her. And still to this day, everyone's like, where's Shelly? Okay, so there are real life consequences for these cults. People think of them as entertaining or weird, or only stupid people join cults. But the fact is, these tactics are used by multiple groups, whether they're sororities, fraternities, military groups. There's all kinds of groups that can turn on a person. And it is hard. And when you see someone speaking out, like Daniela Mestaniak, who I had on my show a couple weeks ago, she's speaking out from two cults, Children of God and the military, where she was sexually abused in both. And the rape culture is in both. So, yeah, the bravery of people to finally just go, look, man, you got to know what's been happening. I got to get this off my chest. We can live any longer with it, with the pain, basically. The scales in front of you, pain versus destruction of my life. I'll take destruction of my life for 2,000, Alex. I can no longer live with this shit. So yeah, no, you're on the right channel, and I really, really applaud your work. I think it's going somewhere. What are your plans now? That's the next thing I want you to tell my listeners. But please take the time to tell us all the things you've got going and what's hot on the burner and where they can see these things.
It's really right now about like keeping the momentum up, but a lot of this story is like outside of my hands. Like the idea when I created this website was to make something that other journalists would write about, that would get covered, having people on the internet, like I listened to a podcast yesterday that I'd never heard before, where it was people talking about the body.
Really?
It was like this wellness podcast thing, and it was like, holy shit, like that's such a cool thing to exist. Yay. And that's like, whoever listens to that podcast knows about this thing now. So it's just keeping like that internet machine moving.
Okay.
And I'm working on an article right now about Melissa Parker that I'm going to.
Okay.
I mean, it should have been done a week ago.
You know, writers and deadlines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
No, but story on Melissa Parker, who's now in Australia? Or
yes.
Okay. And where will that appear?
That's just going to be on my website. I have
cultstories.com.
Yeah, or the Body INTL. They pretty much go to the same place.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I feel like that's a story that has like people are interested in, and I have like a 3-minute TikTok about it.
Okay, and your TikTok is Syran Warner?
Yeah, just Syran Warner, all one word. You know, it's just something that like I feel like people need to know like that whole like that story, and I'm just trying to put something together that explains sort of, you know, how did this woman leave behind a 2-year-old and her 5 other kids, wind up in Australia, and like what's going on in Australia? Like what is that all about? Because I feel like it's something that confuses people, and it's just such a bizarre element to this story that I just want to have something out there that explains it more. But I mean, there's always like the next thing. I mean, if I wish I had like a team of writers or something putting stuff together, but you know, I just can do the next thing and, you know, talk to people like you.
Yeah.
And, you know, every time the next thing comes out, like there's just a little bit more information. And, you know, people like it. One thing that's cool about the internet too is that people might see a TikTok video and then go to YouTube and then go to the website and then like look at what other people are saying. Like people are interested in cults who've never been in cults just because it's sensational. There's harm in there to an extent, but there's also like just getting people this information if they don't know about cults. Like, you know, I try to put in informative things in there about cults where, you know, if somebody is interested in a cult story, they do a deep dive and they understand what like the warning signs are of a cult, or like why this guy is dangerous, why there's, you know, like he's not that unique when you really like peel everything back. He does the same tricks like every cult leader does. Like, you know, that person is less likely to ever get involved in a cult. They might dip a toe in and then be scared of what they see, and this isn't right, and you know, maybe you would stop people from getting involved in this stuff in the first place.
You're right. There is this danger because it's fascinating. The charisma, the power, the group thing. You know, I can say I experienced things that people have never experienced in that cult, and it destroyed me at the same time. You know, so it is like a mirror you shouldn't look in too long, or we are getting out info to prevent it. You know, that fascination does take people in, and that is very effective. That charismatic stuff. I'm reading this religion book, and it goes all the way back to the beginning of time. Charismatic leaders convince you to believe things. It's a structure. It's one of the structures in religious studies. Charismatic leader. So yeah, it's a realm that's getting more exposed, and we owe you and other people like you the gratitude of that. We need this to be as common as kids don't talk to strangers.
Exactly. I mean, I think we talked about this before we were recording or whatever, but I think we both agree that like if they just had some, you know, 30-minute, if you were in social studies in 8th grade and they were like, hey, this is what coercive control is.
Yeah.
And like it happens to tons of people. This is what it looks like. These are the warning signs. Like this is like how you have like these are the tips that you will see. These are, you know, this is just stuff that you would notice. And
here's what you will feel when someone's talking to you.
Yeah, and this is what like other cult survivors. I mean, you could make a 30-minute video or something like that, and show it on some Friday and before the semester is about to end. Like, doesn't
critical
like,
cult theory.
Yeah, just like just a tiny bit of education. Yeah. Because I mean, we warn people about like domestic violence.
Yes,
but like we don't talk about cults.
And people can you mentioned this in our pre-chat. People can understand the silence of domestic violence, and then they'll say, "I love him." They've got Stockholm syndrome. They love their abuser. Okay, it's the same in cults.
Yes,
it's the same. We're answering to our master, who we believe is responsible for our soul, our hierarchical achievements, our death, our ascension to heaven or not. They're telling us how to live. They're telling us this is what it boils down to. The person has a lot of power over their congregation. And there's a point when they go too far, and that's when it becomes a cult. You know, it isn't just coming together to worship. It's coming together to do whatever they have on their agenda that we never signed up for. And that is where it turns into a cult. So yeah, you're really on the right track, my friend. Loving it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate. I mean, whatever I can do to amplify the story too. Like,
well, I'll be giving your updates on my Substack and on this show as they come out. I look forward to them. And so remember, people, to look at cultstories.com. thebody, INTL.com. You can also Google search The Body Cult. Those are hot keywords now. You could see the video on TikTok. There's a lot to back watch that we didn't cover here. So I would recommend y'all do that. And Syran, thank you so much for being my guest on the Franky Files today. It's been such a pleasure.
No, it's been my pleasure. Like, I really appreciate you having me on.
If you would like information on cults in the news, please join my new Substack, frankytees.substack.com. Follow me on Reddit at FrankyTees and on Twitter at FrankyTees for supplemental discussion. You're listening to The Franky Files, frankyfilespodcast.com.